How much should a fix and flip rehab actually cost? Over the past 20 years, I've gotten pretty good at estimating rehab costs just on the spot by looking at a property. But how do you know if the rehab is too much to take on or if it's the right amount, right in that sweet spot? Well, we're gonna dive in and talk about that right now. First off, it's really important that you remember all the costs associated with making a fix and flip happen. Let me jump over to the whiteboard to show you this. So let's say you're buying the property for $100,000. Let's say that the rehab is $30,000 and your closing costs and fees and payments and all that stuff is gonna be about $15,000. Well, you're into this property about $145,000, okay? But that's not all. You also are gonna have agent fees, titles fees, transfer taxes, all that type of stuff. So the difference between this should be somewhere between 70 on the, well, the lower the better, but 70 to 80%, the lower the better. If it's under 70, it's even better, which means you're getting even a better deal because that basically gives you about $55,000 worth of margin. With that margin comes out our 6% agent fees, titles fees, which gives us about $30,000 when it's all said and done. 30,000 divided by the 200,000 is about 15%. So do I have a little bit more room in this deal? Yes, I do. So I could actually go up, I could spend another $10,000 in rehab or in some of the other costs and have a 10% or $20,000 profit margin. And that's what I think is the most important thing is when it's all said and done with all the fees, with all the costs, you want to make sure you're making at least 10% or $10,000, whichever is greater. And that 10% is not based upon what you bought it for. The 10% is based upon your total risk, what you're selling the property for, because whether you see that or not, you are on the hook for agent fees and title fees and transaction fees and rehab and closing costs and payments and all that type of stuff. So the risk that you're actually taking on needs to be based upon that resale price of $200,000, which means if it's selling for $200,000, you should be getting $20,000 with 10% or $10,000, whichever is greater. Now, would you like to make more than $20,000? Absolutely. But what we're going to call that is your highest allowable price, meaning you've got to be into this property no more than that amount. Let's jump back over to the whiteboard. Okay. So basically what we're saying is we had the property at 145 with all our costs. We can actually go up to 145 or I'm sorry, 155. We can go to 155. So we need to make sure the 155 includes the purchase, the rehab, the closing costs, all of this, the payments, the hard money loan, the origination fees, everything, all of that, my max price is going to be $155,000 for all those things. Now, the lower I get that, the more profit I am going to have. So you're probably saying, okay, Ryan, how do I figure this stuff out on my own? Well, let's clear this whiteboard and make it really, really simple for you so that you can do the same thing and be like, hey, how much can I actually be into this property and still make it a good deal for me? Okay, here we go. So basically the rule of thumb here is you want to be 70 to 80%, okay? You don't want to be any higher than 80%, and 70% is what I would call ideal, okay? So I don't really like to be into the 80% unless you have a lot of experience and that type of stuff. So let's just use, we're going to use 75%, okay? So let's just say the resale, and maybe we'll do some, let's do a 70, and let's do an 80 as well, okay? So what we're first going to talk about is the resale price, okay? Resale, I'm going to say on all of these, the resale price is going to be $200,000. Okay. So what that means is the highest I can be is going to be 75% of that. So if I take this and bring out my handy dandy calculator and say 200,000 times 0.75, that means I can be into this property. My all-in price is $150,000. Now, what does that $150,000 need to include? Let me change markers here. It needs to include the purchase. It needs to include the rehab. It needs to include all of your hard money costs, origination. It needs to include all your payments. It needs to include all of your title fees. So if you can get all of those things at the 150 or less, then you're doing very well. Well, that's where you need to be. I don't know if very well is the right thing to say. Like, that's really where you need to be, okay? Because what happens in here, as we talked about, now you're gonna have all these other set of costs, okay? I'm gonna get rid of this 80% right now so we can just kind of focus on this, because we have selling costs. Okay, so selling costs, we're gonna have our agent fees, which I'm gonna plan on about 6%. We're gonna have title fees, which we're gonna plan on about 1%. You're going to have some, you may have some transfer taxes, and you may have, let's just say 1% on that. And then you may have to negotiate on your price. I always plan about a 3% negotiating room. Okay, so what does all that look like to us? Well, again, we're taking that off the 6% is coming off the 200,000. So 200,000 times 0.06 equals $12,000, okay? So this is $12,000. This is gonna be $2,000, $2,000, and this is gonna be $6,000 is basically what we're gonna be taking off here. So if we look at all that, we're talking 12,000 plus 2,000 plus 2, whoa, that didn't work. 12,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 6,000. We're talking about $22,000 in costs here. Our all-in cost was 150, so now we're into this at 172K. Okay, so the difference between that and what we bought the property, what we're into the property, 172 minus 200, that puts us at $28,000. So in this scenario, I could pay a little bit more without breaking my 10% or $10,000 rule, which basically means I've got about $8,000 to play with. Okay, so $8,000 could go into additional rehab, $8,000 could go towards payments, it could go to a little bit more negotiating, or that $8,000 extra could go in your pocket for all the hard work that you've done. But you can clearly see here, you've got to make sure you're taking all of these things into consideration. What if you're dealing with properties that are a little less expensive and it's got an expensive rehab? How do you know what to do? Well, that's where the rule of that 10% or $10,000 comes into play. If you're dealing with a property for $50,000, 10% of $5,000 is not worth the risk taking on. So you want to make sure you know that 10% or $10,000, whichever is greater, is really what it comes to. Okay, next, let's just talk about with this rehab, like what rehab should you be taking on and what rehabs shouldn't you be taking on? Well, I think the easiest way to look at this comes down to experience. Do you have experience doing rehabs? Do you have experience being a general contractor? Do you have experience being a subcontractor? If so, and you've got some experience doing that, you probably could go with a little more expensive rehabs. If not, you probably should be doing what's called a cosmetic rehab. Let me explain. First off, let's talk about things that I don't think anybody should be doing. I don't think you should be dealing with mold. I don't think you should be dealing with meth, like major mold, meth. I don't think you should be dealing with foundation issues. Those types of things you just don't want to deal with, okay? Those things are no fun, okay? So I kind of rule those out. And then we get into what we say is somebody's got experience. Well, then I think they can go into doing more things, like they can, in the basement, they could make some additional rooms, or they could convert an attic into a bedroom. Those are types of things where I'm saying experience either through doing it before or through having experience through construction. That type of stuff may qualify for that. Now, if you're just getting started and you haven't done rehabs before, what you want to be doing is cosmetic rehabs. That means I'm not doing any construction. I am not turning an unfinished basement into bedrooms and bathrooms. What I'm doing is ripping out the cabinets and putting in new cabinets, repainting the house, putting new fixtures in, changing all the lights out, changing from the puke olive colored stove to something that's maybe stainless steel. That's what we're going to call a cosmetic rehab, where we're basically saying we're going to upgrade what is in there, but everything else stays the same. And so that's what I think you should be looking at if you're just getting started or you're newer, because that is going to lower the amount of risk that you're going to have to deal with and the amount of time. So then there's this question is, how much should you be into the rehab based upon the property? So if I'm buying a property for $50,000, does it make sense to put $100,000 of rehab into it? And I can tell you, anytime it's more than 100% of what you're buying the property for, I have big concerns with that. So if you're buying the property for $100,000 and you're putting $100,000 into it, that is concerning, but if you're buying a property for $100,000, putting $200,000 into it, that's just a no-go in my book. There's no way you're going to improve the property enough to 3 times the value of that property, even if you put golden toilets in and paint the walls with silver. I just don't see that happening. So just be mindful of that. If that rehab is more than a 1-to-1 ratio, which means if you're buying it for 50, the rehab should not be over 50. And most of the time, I would say rehab costs for things I do is about 20 to 30% of what the resale price is going to be, or the purchase price is going to be, I should say. So you probably, like on this property, my rehab would probably be $30,000. I'm reselling the property for $20,000. So that's about 15% of that. I'm all in at $150, so it's about 20% or at $30,000 for that rehab. So those are some things to keep in mind as you are looking at this. Now, what if the rehab costs are just really low? Well, if you're going to keep this property as a rental property, you may not make it as nice as if you were going to fix and flip the property, and you may put some different materials in. So for example, you might put in vinyl plank, luxury vinyl plank, LVP, because if that gets cut and those things, it looks good. You can take one out. It lasts a long time. It may be a little more expensive, but in the long run, you're going to come out ahead. In addition to that, you're probably not going to paint multiple colors. You're probably just going to paint a white color and make it really easy on yourself. You're also probably going to want to look for carpets that are going to be more durable, stain resistant. Those are some things you're probably going to want to look for. Now, that doesn't mean you have to put the nicest stainless steel ovens in. You might just want to put a black oven in and save yourself some money on something like that. Those are all things to take in consideration based upon what you are doing with the property. If you're planning on burying the property, where you're going to actually refinance that, put a tenant in there, refinance it, and keep it long term, your repairs are going to be a little bit different. But keep in mind that if for any reason you decide to sell that property, those costs, what you decided to do, is going to have an impact on the resale price. If you plan on doing a rental grade fix-ups and then you try and sell it on the market, you're not going to get the same as if you did a full fix-up. So there's some differences there, and you've really got to be aware of it. If you'd like my exact process for calculating ARVs fast, like knowing what those are going to look like, I will go through and show you how to do it fast and most accurately. I'll show you how to throw out bad deals faster and move on to the good ones. And my rule of thumb for the very best comps you should be using. Check out this video. You're going to love it, and make it a profitable day.